In January of 1978, over 100 volunteers in Ocala, Florida searched high and low for 8-year-old Trisa Gail Thornley. The girl had not come home from school that day, and family members knew that she wouldn't have simply run off. Searchers combed the area around 8th Street Elementary School where the girl was a student. They checked nearby woods, under houses, inside dumpsters, and they even checked abandoned refrigerators. There was no sign of the girl whatsoever. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. And when the truth finally came out, it pointed to a man the family never would have suspected. My name is Michael, and much like the Halloween murder of Karen Mock, which is one of the very first videos I made on this channel, what happened to Trisa Thornley is frightening because it could happen to anyone. I'd like to thank Ocala FL 954 for bringing Trisa's story to my attention, and suggestions are always welcome. The full newspaper article from my thumbnail is available at grimsilence.com, and if you're interested in true crime that tends to be older and more obscure, please be sure to like and subscribe. In 1978, John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John thrilled audiences in Greece, Muhammad Ali was boxing's world heavyweight champion, and over 900 died in the Jonestown Massacre, which took place in the country of Guyana. A world away from Jonestown, nestled in the quiet and seemingly safe town of Ocala, Florida, Trisa Gail Thornley was a happy little third grader, and she was living what seemed like a pretty great life. The 8-year-old loved vanilla ice cream, cheeseburgers and french fries, and she loved reading, and most of all, she loved her family and her dog Gigi. Trisa and Gigi were inseparable, and according to Trisa's uncle, she wouldn't go anywhere without her pup. Trisa Thornley disappeared on January 23, 1978. It was just another Monday, and when the final bell at 8th Street Elementary School rang, Trisa started on her short walk home as she always did. Her home was only 6 blocks from school, and the walk should have taken her perhaps 10 minutes, 15 at the most. At the time, Trisa's parents, James and Patricia Ann Thornley, were in Montana. They were searching for a new place to settle after selling their mobile home in Florida. Trisa and her big sister, 15-year-old Tracy, were left in the care of their aunt and uncle. The girls were in good hands, but when Trisa didn't come home at the usual time, Tracy got worried, and so she and her uncle searched the area around the family's home before ultimately calling the police to report the girl missing. What the family didn't realize at the time was that this tragic moment hadn't come out of nowhere. For months before Trisa's disappearance, the Thornley household had been plagued by anonymous, obscene phone calls. The exact details of the calls were not disclosed by police, but their nature was enough to rattle the adults in the home. Nonetheless, the unsettling calls were written off, likely with the hope that the caller would simply stop. No one suspected they could be the prelude to something as devastating as Trisa's abduction. On the day she went missing, Trisa told a friend that she was going to take a shortcut home. Along the way, she stopped for a moment to talk with a boy she knew, and that was the last time the girl was seen alive. It was later revealed that before Trisa vanished, a 13-year-old girl had reportedly been approached by a man who attempted to lure her into his car. This happened only 10 blocks from 8th Street Elementary. It wasn't long before missing person posters blanketed storefronts and street corners. Trisa's photograph was plastered everywhere, along with a detailed description of what she was wearing on January 23rd. Initial search efforts focused on the area around 8th Street Elementary and the Thornley home. Police and volunteers went through wooded patches and empty lots. The search was exhaustive, and no stone was left unturned, but the effort yielded nothing, not even a single clue. At one point, bloodhounds were brought in from the local Marion Correctional Institution at Lowell, a fact that would carry with it some irony as the investigation unfolded. More on that soon. Ocala Police Chief Lee McGehee had little to go on as the investigation got underway. But by early February, police had checked on more than 200 leads that had poured in. Still, they were no closer to finding Trisa Thornley than they had been on the day she disappeared. And yet, there was something quietly disturbing about the obscene phone calls that preceded all of this. What had seemed like random harassment now felt very deliberate. Perhaps the caller had been targeting Trisa all along. It would eventually become clear that those calls were a warning sign, although the family had no way of knowing that at the time. Trisa's parents, who were in Montana at the time of the disappearance, rushed back to Florida upon hearing that their little girl was missing. They had another phone line installed so that the family's original phone line would always be open in case Trisa were to call. The family believed that Trisa was still alive. Trisa's mother gave interviews and tried to keep her daughter's name in the papers, but as the days and weeks dragged on, she could feel that public interest in Trisa's whereabouts was beginning to wane. That was what happened when 12-year-old Dorothy Schofield had gone missing 18 months earlier. People just stopped talking about it after a while, and now the same thing was happening to 8-year-old Trisa. Dorothy Schofield was never found, but that's a story for another time. On the morning of March 15, 1978, 52 days after Trisa Gail Thornley disappeared, yet another obscene phone call was made to the Thornley house. But this call came in on the new phone line, the one that the family had only recently installed, and the number was unlisted. The caller asked Patricia Thornley if she, and I'm quoting here, would do anything to get her daughter back. And then the man on the other end of the call proceeded to ask Trisa's mother if she would have sex with him. He said that she would never see Trisa alive again unless she did. Police had tapped both of the phone lines in the Thornley home, and upon being notified of the call, they immediately tracked down the caller and hauled him into the police station for questioning. The caller was 20-year-old Aubrey Dennis Adams, Jr. He worked as a guard at the Marion Correctional Institution, the very same facility that had earlier provided bloodhounds to aid in the search for Trisa. And up until that day, Adams had been a close friend of the Thornley family. While Adams was being questioned by police, the search for the missing girl came to a grim conclusion. 3 men had ventured into a wooded area near the Ocala Municipal Airport, about 8 miles from the Thornley home. The men were searching for gopher tortoises, which are now protected but were apparently common in 1970s Florida. Instead of finding tortoises, the men came across a plastic bag which was surrounded by the foul stench of death. Eddie Williams, one of the men who discovered the little girl's remains, said he knew what was in the plastic bag when he saw it. And upon examination, what investigators found was extremely disturbing. Trisa's clothing had all been removed. A rope had been wound around her neck, and the girl's wrists had been taped together behind her head. The cause of death was most likely strangulation. This was the work of a true monster. Found near the body were items that pointed to Trisa. Her school books, which bore her name, and clothing was found as well. The articles of clothing were consistent with what the girl had been wearing on the day she disappeared. However, it took dental records to confirm what Trisa's family already feared to be true. The Thornley family was aghast at learning that Adams was the obscene caller and that he had been arrested for the murder of young Trisa. The Thornleys knew him, they trusted him, and perhaps worst of all, Trisa felt safe around him. When Patricia Ann Thornley was informed of his arrest, she was absolutely stunned. She said that Trisa would have gone anywhere with the recently divorced Adams, whose ex-wife had been Trisa's first-grade teacher. In the years prior to the couple's divorce, Adams and his wife had visited the Thornley home many times. Trisa's sister, Tracy, described their relationship with Adams as super close. Adding further insult to the tragedy was the fact that Adams had recently visited the Thornley home. This was after Trisa's disappearance, and he did so most likely to give the impression that he was concerned about the girl. During the trial of Aubrey Dennis Adams Jr., prosecutors presented exhibit after exhibit of damning physical evidence. And there were the months of anonymous obscene phone calls that had targeted the Thornley family. These calls, unnerving as they were at the time, now seemed to point to this supposed friend's pattern of obsession and manipulation. The judge wouldn't allow the full content of the calls to be read out in court, but prosecutors made it clear that they were anything but random, a precursor to the horror Adams would later carry out. Adams wrote a confession that would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. In it, he described picking up Trisa in his car and then beginning to drive toward her home, only to suddenly change course toward Central Florida Community College. In his account, he is quoted as saying, "I remember being stopped and she was screaming." And then, according to Adams, he put his hand over her mouth and she quit breathing. Police asked Adams if he had essayed the girl. Adams claimed that he couldn't bring himself to do it. The Marion County Medical Examiner said that there was no way to tell if the girl had been assaulted. Her body was too badly decomposed. Adams attempted to distance himself from the murder by framing the confession as if it were all part of a dream. Adams could call it whatever he wanted, but to the police, it was nothing less than an admission of guilt. Between the confession and all of the physical evidence, there was zero doubt in the courtroom that Adams had taken the life of Trisa Thornley. It was determined that the murder probably took place at the killer's home. 71 pieces of physical evidence were brought before the court, including Trisa's textbooks and socks, the tape that bound her small wrists, and the rope that was used to strangle her. Witnesses testified that the rope, which had been wound around Trisa's neck 7 times, matched rope that was found in the killer's car. Inside the home of Aubrey Adams was a package of plastic bags that matched the plastic bags that Trisa's body was wrapped in. And a pillowcase that was found with Trisa's body became another link. Witnesses testified that the pillowcase was from a local Holiday Inn where Adams had once worked. Adams had more of the same pillowcases in his apartment. The attorney prosecuting the case pointed out that Adams nearly got away with murder. Had Adams not made that final phone call to the Thornley house on the day that Trisa's body was found, he might never have been caught. The defense attempted to convince the jury that Adams had had a crisis of conscience, and he made that last obscene phone call because he wanted to be caught. The claim was that Adams knew the phone was tapped and that calling the house was his way of getting the police to come and arrest him. At the conclusion of the 7-day trial, the jury took all of 90 minutes to find Aubrey Adams guilty. And although sentencing was ultimately up to the judge in this case, the jury's recommendation was death. The judge, who had never before handed down a death sentence, agreed with the jury. Aubrey Adams spent the next 11 years on death row, and in May of 1989, the man who had murdered Trisa Thornley died in the electric chair for his crime. Sadly, Trisa's father, James Thornley, didn't live long enough to see Adams meet his end. Speaking of her late husband and the loss of their little girl, Trisa's mother said, "This killed him. He never got over it." Condolences to Trisa's family and all who were close to her. Please stay safe, give your kids an extra big hug, and thank you for watching.